Welcome everyone. I see everyone's grabbing lunch, and come have a seat or sit at a table where you don't know folks. Come on in, and we're all family this weekend. Right? So welcome to UX Days 2026. It's our 5th UX Days at Siebel Center for Design. I'm Rachel Switzky. I'm the director of Siebel Center for Design. On behalf of my entire team and the University of Illinois, it's my pleasure to welcome you here, whether you've come across campus, across the state, or much further. We're glad that you've made the trip in any case. So UX Days is one of my favorite events of the year, and not just because it fills the building with some of the most curious, talented, and engaged people I know. It's because this conference, it does something rare. It creates honest conversation about the real texture of design work. That ambiguity, the pressure, the craft, the meaning of it all, the new uses of technology, et cetera. And that texture is, we're able to get into in the weeds on that. This year's theme is systems in flux, designing what comes after. And we chose this theme deliberately, not just as a provocation, though maybe somewhat as a provocation, but it's an honest description of where we are, no matter where you are as a designer in the world right now. The systems that have organized our professional lives, how we research, how we prototype, how we collaborate, how we define what it means to be a designer today, it's all being renegotiated right now. And I think we'll see that through the conversations of today and tomorrow. It's also happening in real time. So it's allowing us not a lot of time for reflection. These intelligent tools they're entering our workflows. The boundaries between authorship and automation, everything's shifting. Institutions are being asked to do more with less, faster than ever, with higher stakes than before. And I say that as an educator, and I'm also saying that for the folks who are representing in our audience from from industry as well. So in the middle of all that, close to our heart, are people. It's the people who are using our systems, the people who who deserve experiences that are clear, equitable, trustworthy, genuinely useful, and a pleasure to use. So as designer, we all know that is our North Star. It always has been. It's not going to change. But the terrain around that North Star, it's changing dramatically, and it will keep changing. So the question this conference asks is not whether change is happening. We're all feeling that in the acceleration and am I doing enough? And where am I in understanding what's happening? The question is, what do we as designers, what do we do with this? So, do we design what comes next? Generally new systems, new frameworks, new ways of centering the human experience in a machine-augmented world? Or do we focus our energy on improving what already exists, refining the systems we've built, closing equity gaps, making tools more humane? So the honest answer, of course, is both. That neither is easy. Creating something genuinely new, it does require the courage and vision that we're always looking towards, but improving what exists, doing the patient, unglamorous work of making broken systems better, of which we've all had that experience, I imagine, in some way or other, it requires something just as hard. This rigor, obviously empathy, and the willingness in which to, stay engaged with the process and what we believe as designers. So over the next 2 days, you'll hear from practitioners who are doing both. You'll work through real design challenges and workshops, hear lightning talks from people doing this work across healthcare, enterprise software, civic tech, AI, education, and more. You'll have the chance to ask some of these hard questions and build connections that last hopefully beyond this room, of course. And we're starting here with a conversation to kick off this conference. So before I introduce our panelists, I do want to say one thing directly to the students in this room, that you are not just observers in this moment in design. You are part of shaping it. You are going to be critical in shaping it. And we've been here before, and I think the practitioners will have experiences of when it is that they've been at that moment as well. So the designers on this stage, they came up through periods of significant transition too, and their careers were shaped by the questions they chose to ask and the projects they chose to take on. So your generation, you're inheriting a genuinely complex set of challenges, and I believe you have the capacity to meet them in ways that are creative, ethical, and deeply human. So that's what this conference is about, and that's what this panel is about today. So we're going to get into it. All right, I'm going to do some introductions. So our first panelist sitting here, Sana Baksood. All right, I should have asked you about, I asked you about your first name pronunciation, but not the second. So Sana is a lead UX designer at Amazon and a professor of UX design at New York University. So she's bridging both education and practice. Is an interesting perspective. So Sana's based in Brooklyn, New York, with 10 plus years of experience shaping digital products, scaling teams, and driving multi-million-dollar business impact. Sana is a lead UX designer at Amazon, where she teaches at NYU, graduate UX and emerging technology courses. Sana's work spans large-scale commerce in fintech platforms, as well as interactive installations that respond to biosignals and embody states through brainwave-driven interaction. Sana has previously worked at Afterpay, Thomson Reuters, NASDAQ, and the First Republic Bank, a lot of financial systems on your resume, designing complex systems used by customers and businesses at scale. Sana is a founder and creative director of Sood, I'm saying that right, gender-neutral jewelry brand featured in Vogue, Glamour, Elle, and Vanity Fair, and is an active mentor and public speaker in the global design community. All right, next person. I'm so excited to have you all here. It's so exciting. Okay, Marissa Peacock is a senior lecturer in the Department of Advertising at University of Illinois College of Media and an MFA candidate in design research and instruction. Another interesting blend of people we have here. So Marissa operates at a fascinating intersection. She is simultaneously a practitioner, an educator, and a researcher, and she designs tools for other educators. Her project, Create with Compliance, applies UX principles and behavior-based design to curriculum itself, building resources that help advertising faculty teach inclusive, ethical, and legally compliant practices. Marissa runs UIUC's social media lab and teaches courses in AI and advertising. She's someone who asks, what does it mean to design not just an interface, but an entire learning system? And how do we make that system more human-centered, equitable, and actionable? Next person is Spencer McDaniel, and he's a UX designer at OSF Healthcare, and this is his third UX days in presenting here. So Spencer works on one of the most consequential design challenges in UX right now, healthcare systems. I know we got more healthcare folks in the audience as well. His focus is on transition from foundational design systems into scalable component libraries, the kind of infrastructure work that doesn't always get glamorous headlines, but determines the quality and consistency of every patient and clinician-facing experience that follows. Spencer represents a generation of designers who understand that systems thinking isn't separate from user advocacy. It is user advocacy done at scale. And our last panelist, but not least, is Jeff Stefgen, all right, thank you. Senior Director of Product Design at Vibes and an Illini dad. Just wanted to mention that. Woo. Just want to do that little call out for you. So Jeff brings 25 plus years of experience shaping UX strategy for SaaS platforms and mobile products. At Vibes, his team designs enterprise tools that help major brands engage consumers across mobile messaging channels. And they're doing it in an era where generative AI is actively reshaping what intelligent product design looks like. So you're very much, you're in it, yes, I think we all are in it. Let's see. Jeff's teams work every day at the intersection of enterprise complexity, AI integration, and the need for experiences that are actually trustworthy and useful, not just technically impressive. He's been designing through multiple waves of technological disruption and has a long view on what changes and what doesn't. Oh, fascinating. All right. So let's get started. I'm excited to chat with you guys. Get my phone out of my pocket. I'm not sitting on my phone. All right. The theme of this conference is, as I mentioned before, here we we too close to each other? Is systems in flux designing what comes after? Before we get into the big debates that I'm sure are going to happen, I want to start grounded. What system right now do you feel most acutely in flux, and what does that mean for your daily work? Go ahead and start. Go ahead.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me and the lovely introduction. So I think the system that's really in flux is, ooh,
Go ahead.
okay, is I think just the design, like product design, oh.
It is this one, not this one. Hold on, technical difficulties for a moment. Use this
Okay, awesome. Yeah, so I think the system that's in flux is necessarily like looking at the product design role, and I think it's changing drastically in big technology companies. I think with the concept of AI tools, we're needing to have designers do a lot more, and so now we're having to take on roles such as like research, which I think was a piece of it from the beginning, but additional elements of it, along with like copywriting, along with like product management. And I think we're starting to evolve in these roles. Like, I don't necessarily know if it's going to be product design. We may just be product people, where we now have this emphasis of potentially UX or an emphasis of maybe product manager. But I think, you know, again, these tools are expanding our worlds. And because of that, you know, I think we have the opportunity to now define what these new roles are going to be. And so I think that's the exciting part of it, is like the change is happening and we're in the forefront. And I think now, you know, we can say like, okay, we want to take on these new roles and these are the tools we're going to be using and what would that look like? And so, yeah, I would say, like, you know, I think there's a lot more emphasis on like including business acumen in our daily practices, including like coding in our daily practices, along with like, you know, design elements. So, you know, and then as mentioned, like writing as well as, you know, research and all of those things. So,
yeah, I would tend to agree. I'm sort of more at the granular level of it, is that I love workflow management. I love process-driven processes. So I do think that is a consistent system that's always in flux. And it's probably one of the most unsexy things that you can focus on. But it's the most valuable, because you really do have to understand the holistic system in which everything operates, right? So everything that goes out into this omni-channel world, there's a decision that has to go into that. Whether it's, is this appropriate for the audience? Do we have enough inventory for this product? Is it being designed, you know, responsibly and accessibility, you know, wise? And you know, and then who are the people that are involved in that process? And what is the checklist of things that has to go, you know, through it in order for it to be ready for the next step? So I think as we become, you know, more immersed in AI for design and ideation, we still need to go back to that process workflow that says, okay, why was this decision made? Or how is this decision impactful? So even though the AI system is going to be there to kind of help, you know, be more efficient and streamline, we still have to understand the decisions that have made, you know, that have gone into that process. So I'm so much more focused on sort of that decision-making system of flux, because I think it's something that totally gets overlooked at times, but at the most fundamental level, it can play the biggest role in how things happen.
I'm a little biased because I work in healthcare, but healthcare scheduling has changed so dramatically in the last 5 years. We're seeing a big shift from, you know, going to your primary care provider, getting a prescription drug through them, and, you know, a lot of phone calls, not much online scheduling. It's just kind of more tedious than anything. And then with the pitch, or the switch to like Amazon Health, CVS Health, all of like hims and hers, ways to access healthcare without the hassle. And so UX, from a traditional healthcare standpoint, is now a focus, especially after COVID, where we had to pivot to digital designs more, or digital-facing scheduling. So I think that is probably the biggest system in flux for I see every day, where We're looking at, behemoth youth healthcare companies like Mayo Clinic and Cleveland Clinic, really changing how they've operated. It's digital first, it's mobile first. Like, can I schedule an appointment in less than 5 minutes type of thing? So I think UX as a convenience is by far one of the biggest shifts right now.
I'm nodding my head at everybody here saying, yes, 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 please don't take my thunder though, right? So for us, we're in the more traditional software building space. So we're getting into AI now. Our developers just started using Claude Code like literally maybe a month and a half ago, and we're already seeing the efficiencies that it's giving us. So the biggest thing that's in flux for our teams is trying to figure out what that new process is going to look like. When your CEO is telling you AI is going to give us 10x, how does design keep up with 10x development, right? Like, it's not going to happen overnight. If we get 2x, 3x, we're going to be super happy. But for us, it's how does that discovery phase speed up on the design side? How can we use AI to supplement, put scaffolding in that lets us be more efficient with synthesis of our data that's coming in, and how do we connect to our systems and get that data so that we can make decisions very quickly. So I think that's, for us, it's really, agree with everything you said. Our roles are changing, but it's also how we work together as well within this AI transition.
A lot of you mentioned, oh, this is now really hot, okay. A lot of you are you're mentioning, it's still feedbacking. Sorry, Haley, but I'm gonna go down here. Yeah, let's use that. We're agile. So a lot of you are talking about, how you're responding, what you see as changing. As I mentioned in my initial address, there's, we're looking at what's next, and we're also looking at, well, there's still lots of improvements on user experience that need to be fixed before we even tackle any of these issues, and we're kind of dealing with it all at once. But without letting you off the hook with saying both, is there something, do you lean one way or the other right now? And I know we're trying to catch up, but you're also trying to adapt. How would you express that?
Does someone want to start?
Yeah, go for it. I mean, if you have an answer, go. Okay. Yeah, it's really interesting because I think designing what next is built off of what currently is. And I think if you're designing for what's next, you have to be mindful of what the current system is and where there is room for improvement. But also taking into consideration, so I would like to think that I'm designing for what's next because of what isn't or is already happening now, and kind of taking advantage of that, but also looking forward. I think we always need to be looking forward because students are changing, the economy is changing, the global world is changing, right? So all of that is to sort of accommodate what's coming next, but I think the most important part of that is just being agile. And so I think you have to design for what's coming next with the understanding that it might change, that you need to pivot. And I think that's so counter to what currently is, because I think for a lot of systems, we get very comfortable to be like, well, it's always been like this. And, it meets the needs, it's doing okay. And I think we gotta get complacent or more comfortable. And it's harder for us to embrace change because we've always done it that way. Or, you know what, that's gonna add more time. But it's sort of like building the house, the foundation. That's a long-term process so that you can do the more fun, agile stuff later. So I think, you have to consider what is, figure out the direction forward, and then be mindful enough to know that it could switch directions at any time.
Sure, I have some thoughts on this too, because I feel like as a senior leader, I need to focus on what's next. So I'm responsible for our experience vision of like, what are we doing in the next 2 to 3 years? I do think it depends on your role though. So we have lots of legacy systems at Vibes. We're a company that's been around for 25 plus years. We struggle with this all the time, is how do we continue to maintain these old systems and keep up with all the new things, right? So if you're responsible for a legacy system, you're going to be very focused on that. So I think it depends on your role. I think, the focus of my role is, as a senior director, I'm looking outward. You know, traditionally, our platform, you can access it through a UI, a traditional UI. You can access it through APIs. Now we have to think agentically, how are we going to handle that, right? So that's a new thing that, you know, my team might not necessarily be thinking about it, but all the people above us are thinking about it, and we need to be prepared for it.
Okay. I'll kind of piggyback off that because I'm not a senior designer, so I work in the weeds a lot. I think the biggest kind of challenge right now is updating current designs to that standard so we can innovate upon that later. I think that's probably the biggest value that AI adds in my work today. I mean, Claude can literally access your Figma MCP and clean up your file, produce new components, create new tokens even. Like, it does so much that would take me like weeks to do. I'm still not the biggest user of AI, as a disclaimer, but like I can see the value it can bring as, you know, it gets more accurate, more precise, and you can trust it more. I do think, though, in order to innovate, I agree with Marissa, you need to have the foundation set first. And that's kind of, as in healthcare, that's the focus right now. The joke is healthcare's 10 years behind. So we're trying to catch up that 10-year gap, maybe like 5 years behind now.
Awesome. I definitely second everything that everyone said, but I would say, like, one, being a professor from NYU and a leader at Amazon, like, I would say, like, especially for you students, like, I would inspire you to think ahead, because right now, like, you know, like, we set our leadership goals around, like, what we should, like, tools we should be using, and everyone should be using AI. And so, like, if you don't use it, I feel like you'll fall behind. So I want to inspire all of you to, like, incorporate it into your workflows. And so for me, like, I'm thinking ahead with, like, actually diving into biofeedback sensors. And so I'm looking at, you know, brainwaves data and how do we leverage that to create better experiences. And so I think, you know, obviously there's design that needs to be fixed, but I feel like, you know, we're almost in this kind of like similar to the internet boom, like we're in this AI boom right now, and it's early, and so get on it, learn, like, think ahead and start to leverage those tools in ways that it can better help you. But again, keeping in mind the foundation of design, don't skip that piece. And so I think, you know, like, with a strong foundation of design, you know, I've really pushed about, okay, how can I now use, you know, biofeedback sensors, like I mentioned, like heart rate sensors, to then incorporate that into my design to see how we can better understand people and create even better experiences from that. So.
So I'm going to ask individual questions now, and just building on your work in biofeedback, that's super on the edge. And I don't know how many people are familiar with working with biofeedback. I have never done that, so I'm kind of interested in hearing more about that. But, like, how does it feel to be designing at that edge of the user experience and creating something that hasn't been created before? You know, and then, you know, what do you think practitioners who are working in more established fields and problem spaces, how can they either, you know, go into that edge? What would that look like?
Yeah, I would definitely want to give credit to, like, NYU, because I feel like I had a really incredible university help support that thinking. But I would say, like, being in that field, it's really green, and I have a lot of flexibility and freedom to kind of do what I want with it. Versus if you're working in an industry where there's a lot of guidelines and guardrails already, you may sometimes be limited by your creativity on what you can do, but there's, like, pros and cons to both. In the field I'm in, because there's not a lot of guardrails and guidelines, like, I need to be really thoughtful on the type of work I'm producing and the ethics around it, and because I'm working with, like, sensors around, like, body function, there's a lot of, like, elements of, like, thinking about, like, security and data privacy. So, you know, and sensitivity, you know, this is, like, people's body functions that you're using essentially. So, you know, there's elements of, like, getting consent. So I think pros of, like, a lot of freedom and creativity, but the other element is you need to just constantly check yourself and be thoughtful about, are you doing the work in the right way, in the right direction? So.
I have another individual question. This one to you, Marissa. Okay, so you're designing a tool for educators, which means you're working on a system one step removed from the end user. So how do you keep the human, the student, the learner, the person who will ultimately be affected, how do you keep them visible when your immediate users are in the institution?
Yeah, great question. So for me, this actually comes really inherently in how I teach. I believe firmly in learning by doing. So I like to give opportunities for my students to learn, by actively contributing and actively feeling it out for themselves. I'm also someone who knows that there are more than one way to learn. So I don't assume that everyone learns the same, and I don't assume that everyone's going to consume media and information and resources in the same way. So I take that when I'm designing my system. So the thing, I'll be presenting on this tomorrow, so I've created a Create with Compliance sort of toolkit. And in its current state, it might not be the final state, right? It might be constantly evolving, but I wanted something tangible to learn off of. And originally, I designed it. When I started my research, I was like, I was really focused on faculty and how they were going to implement this into their coursework. But when you think about user audiences, to all the faculty in the room, we're not always the most, we don't want to change very easily, right? And so again, if it requires extra work, if it's going to require extra training, we have busy schedules. So again, it's not going to be top of mind. So I kind of pivoted and went to the students. And I was like, wow, if I can really kind of get the students to buy into this, then they can be a driver of change. But that in mind, the reason I love compliance is because I think compliance is fun. I love learning the rules. As a very anxious person, I love the rules, right? I love to know what the rules are, so either I can work around them or work in the system, right? But I understand that not everyone has that feeling about compliance and rules and regulations. So I am not the target user for this, right? So I had to design with someone else. How do I get other people to feel empowered? How do I build their confidence around a subject matter that they might totally disengage from because, for whatever reason? So it's been fun to have that as sort of your process, to be like, okay, it's not for me, it's for someone else, and how do I design for someone else who has all of these limitations and these challenges? But then I have an opportunity to kind of rewrite this narrative to be like, hey, you know what? In order to innovate, you got to know the rules. It's so much more freeing for you to know what you're designing for and sort of the constraints so that you can be more innovative, rather than having to undo it all to meet requirements. So that human element, I think, is always here, because the laws may change, but the process through which we design and create needs to be accepting of that and be agile enough that that's your first line of thinking is, okay, what do I need to make sure that I am designing for? What are the constraints, or even not even, what are the opportunities? And really changing that mindset of seeing it as, okay, I'm a social media manager and it's a global marketplace. So what do I need my social media marketing to be aware of so that I can be in compliance, so that I'm not going to risk, either reputational, harm, or, get myself into legal trouble, or, cause, monetary, actions and things like that. So I think the human element is always there in that research.
I think when we talk about compliance, this mic is so weird. We talk about compliance, it's a very specific context you're talking about, but compliance in healthcare or just general business requirements, I think just design loves constraints.
Yeah.
So, all right, this is not working. So I tried again. What's the problem, microphone? All right, we'll use this one. This one we love. We love this microphone. All right. So we'll just have to take a little moment as we pass the mic down. Spencer, now you're in the hot seat. You mentioned talking about the design for systems and the work that you do with component libraries. It's all about how do you, how do you put the infrastructure for improvement with what already exists and keeping the constraints in place. I think having things be compliant based on the systems that you've designed. But done well, they can also be the foundation for something genuinely new. as you are designing for what could be and then setting the constraints in place. What do you think about that tension between the keeping it compliant but also looking for new opportunities? When does systematizing constrain innovation, and then when does it enable it?
Excellent question. It's something I deal with every day, actually, because I'm usually the one in our team that's the Debbie Downer in terms where I shoot down a lot of components and things. I'm like, well, that's not going to either be consistent with our system, it's not going to follow accessibility standards, but it's also it's also recognizing that user mental models are one of the biggest focuses when you design new components. So as design systems become more and more standard, and even with AI, and they're going to be reading design systems like material design or Fluent systems from Microsoft, things like that people are very used to. The question is it worth breaking this mental model for innovation that would help the user? I will say design systems do one thing really well, which is kind of upping the accessibility standard across all web. I know right now in our design system, we've made the jump from single A to double A accessibility. Big jump. It sounds very simple, just add an A on there. But it's going from our minimum font size increases, our button sizing needs to be 48 by 48 pixels. How do we communicate that to dev? Because usually we just say, oh, here's the bounding box for it, go. But it's also ARIA roles. I can go on and on about accessibility, but design systems do really improve that, but they also do limit how creative you can be, because you always have to keep in mind, is it consistent with how we handle and brand our site? Is it consistent with WCAG accessibility? Are we going to be sued if we do this? If it's not in an edge case scenario, is it going to be possible to do this process, especially in healthcare? I'll get into it later about sometimes users range from being 18, 19 that don't know any insurance terms to 70 or 70 plus where they've never used a phone in their life. So it's a big, yeah. So I would say I do lean into more. It does usually constrain innovation, but you do have to find ways to add it into certain components. I mean, that's what material design did with, they have their pulse animation, which is now the standard. They innovated it back in 2016, and now it's the standard for every button, or most buttons on design systems.
All right. One last question for the individual. Yes, I think it's for you, Jeff. Yes. So you've been doing this for 25 years, as you mentioned. The gray hair. Same here. You watch a lot of next things that are becoming existing things. I look at this trajectory of AI personally in the same way. I was like, didn't we do this 20 years ago with the internet? Anyway. So, and there's people in the audience who were not even born yet. So, but what's your current read? Is AI generally a different kind of systemic change? Is it just another wave that will eventually, settle into kinds of patterns that we already, know how to design for? Let us know your thoughts.
Be faster that way. Yeah, I totally agree with you. So this is actually in one of my presentations as well. Just setting up that I'm old. People didn't have their own computers when I went to college. You had to fight in a computer lab. So there was the PC revolution, and then there was this whole thing of oh, we used to code in terminals. Then there was this thing called a GUI. Oh, and guess what? And then they needed UX help, but it wasn't called UX. It was HCI, right? So yeah, I think, we've been through that. We've been through the web. We've been through mobile apps. We've been through the ways that we build things change from waterfall to agile. So, things are always in flux. Things are always changing. Are there patterns? Yeah, there's definitely patterns. I will say AI for me has been the one has been wow, you're doing all of those things though. You're changing the way that the tool that I use, you're changing the way that I work personally, you're changing the people that I work with and the way that we work together. So, and you're doing it really fast. I've never seen anything this fast. So it concerns me a little bit because we don't have great design standards for some of these things. We're just guessing right now. So it's not super mature, but yeah, definitely I think there's patterns there that we can build on. And I would say don't freak out. We've been here before. life is going to change. If you're not feeling uncomfortable, you're probably not doing the right things, right? So.
A general question, just, where in your work have you found, or you found yourself genuinely surprised in what the users are, what users are needing now? And again, it's so new, and we don't know what the systems need to be supporting certain types of interactions that are emerging through new uses of technology. So, is there anything that you could think of that has challenged your assumptions in that way? And Marissa, you look like you're
I'm chomping on the bit here. Yeah. So it was really interesting. So so for 2 semesters, I taught an AI and advertising class. And it was a special topics class open to anyone. And really it was just to sort of be like, okay, what is AI? And how did we get here? And how can it be used? So the first 8 weeks was just exploring with it, using it. And then the second 8 weeks was being like, should we use it? And what do we have to be careful of? And in that first 8 weeks, we did a lot of human versus AI outputs. We would do the same exercise in class. We'd do it the human way, and then we would do it with AI. And what was really fascinating about this was that a lot of the students in the class just prefer doing it by themselves, because to use AI, so I think going back to like what the world thinks AI is, the general public is like it's magic. But it's not magic. You have to refine it. You have to curate it. You have to be able to articulate what you want from it to get it to do what you want. So you usually start off being like, oh, I want this thing that's in my brain, and I want it to happen right away. And so, but it doesn't. And so then you need to refine it, and you need to be like, oh, well, maybe I need to tell it to do this instead. Or maybe I need to define what I mean by make it better, right? Or something like that. So it really challenges you to articulate what it is that you are trying to create. And I think that takes a lot of time, right? And so sometimes it's just easier if I do it myself. Even if it's not perfect, I can get it to where I kind of thought it should be or would be, because I can start making these modifications without actually having to articulate it definitively, like typing it in. Like every time you're telling your brain to like, oh, change that line a little bit, or bring that out over here, or maybe let's, add a little more gray or whatever. Like you're not actually having to stop and be like, system, you need to extend that line X degrees, right? Sort of thing. And I think that's the challenge of AI. And that's why I think sometimes there is, and I think it's an interesting challenge, because I do want people to know that they can do things, that they don't always need to rely on AI. But at the same time, I think it's actually a really great tool, because going back to my love of process development and workflows, is that me as a strategist, I need to be able to explain to my creative team, you need to make it better. And what do I mean by that, right? I need to be able to articulate to them and being like, okay, here's what's happening, or here's the emotion we need to tap into, and here are the elements at play, and here's what our audience is doing, and I need to be able to synthesize that. So it's actually, I think, a really great exercise for people using AI to go through that process of being like, okay, how do I improve this? How do I get it to where I want it to be? And what do those prompts look like? And what does that curation look like? So that's the thing that surprises me, is that most students will just be like, it's not worth, and in a good way, because they're like, I'll just do it myself. But it really speaks to, I think, the bigger creative process where you're like, the first iteration is not going to be the best. And so you have to refine, you have to iterate. And so how do you get it to, that next level in a very deliberate, strategic, articulate way?
A little bit different of an angle. So going back to biofeedback sensors, because it's such a new green and new space, my art practice involves using them to create visuals and sound. And so it's an installation. And so originally my assumption was that, it's an art piece. And so I don't necessarily want to tell users what this data means, what they're seeing. And what they're using is brainwave sensors. So they wear it across their heads. Essentially 2 users wear it together, and they can kind of explore the installation and see what comes up. And so as I learned was that users were like, what is happening? Like, how did you do this? What am I seeing? What does that mean? Am I angry? Am I calm? Am I, and originally my question was like, I wanted to read emotion, But if you take a step back, emotion is really, really hard to read. First of all, I may ask you how you're feeling. You may say you're fine, but you may not be fine. So having a sensor say someone is a certain emotion is incorrect. So it's less about emotion, it's more about state of minds. And so I do think like there's this innate desire for people to learn more about themselves, and with these sensors they want to do that. But I think the sticky part and the hard part about it is the data can be really noisy. You also don't want to identify it as a certain state where then it may make that person feel a certain way. So there's a lot of like guardrails and guidelines you have to follow. And so I still do think like my piece worked in a way where I do want people to come and experience it and figure out what it means for themselves. But yeah, I think like the biofeedback sensors, because it's like human data, you just have to be very, very careful with not like tagging it as a certain state or emotion. And so I think there's a lot of challenges in the space that need to be figured out.
I'll answer. Yeah. So I think for me, the biggest surprise was we spent a lot of time putting AI into our products. So just to give you context, so Vibe's customers are very large enterprise brands like Kohl's or Chipotle, or folks that are getting messages out. It's all about mobile messaging. So for us, we thought, oh, this is going to be great. Like our customers can use AI and do this stuff. And then the adoption was like, I'm like, what? So did a little research. We found out, like people aren't trusting AI as much. So for us, the big surprise was that, okay, now we have to take that information and we have to make a better experience that gives you context about like, oh, this is where it's getting data from, and this is why it's suggesting this, and it is good data. Like you can trust it. So I think that's the biggest thing for me is like I'm a very tech forward person. I'm like glomming on and saying like I see how the sausage is made inside, and I'm ready to eat it. Like they're like I don't know. Like it's looking a little weird to me. So I think that was the biggest surprise for me. Yeah.
I can go real quick. I'll just say one thing I take for granted is that when on my phone or on a website, I can read, scroll, and like just interact like with no issue. But when we worked on our website, we realized, keyboard navigation, voice input navigation is so crucial. And when I was testing with those systems, it's surprisingly robust now. Like you can fill out an entire form for insurance online without typing a single word. And like navigate, no problem. And it's like understanding how, just on the back end of coding, I'm not a coder, but I just learning how to like properly tag things or like even communicate it to developers. Like, yeah, we would like them to be able to do this without requiring a keyboard input. I think is a very big innovation right now. Something that I take for granted and didn't really think too much about before this.
Through this conversation, I'm just thinking in my brain as a systems thinker of all the things that I'm like, oh, that's cool that they implemented that now. And then all the places where I'm like, no, what are you doing? What, no, don't, like I had an Adobe product up and something popped up with AI and I was like, no, get rid of that. No, I don't want that there. So it's an evolution, right? So, all right, let's now talk about education and practice. So this conference is asking, what do we keep, what do we break, and what must we rebuild? So I want to ask each of you that directly. What one thing in UX practice or in UX education, a lot of students here, what do you think needs to be broken or fundamentally rethought? Who wants to start?
Yeah, I mean, this to me, it goes back to the process of how we develop software. So again, AI is coming and how can we speed up? So it is really sort of a scary time for us because we don't know what does, to your point, like, are we product people now? And also, how do we work together? Because these other folks they're going to try to figure out how they're going to fit into this AI world. So there's a lot of gray areas between a product manager and a product designer. So where can you bring your specialty? Where can you learn from other people about those skills? And to Marissa's point, it does become a little bit more like you have to be a good prompt engineer. Like you have to understand how the system works in order to sort of like bring the best out of it. And again, it's still using that design process of you have to go through the phases. It's just making it a lot faster.
I think right when I graduated, so I graduated from Bradley in a UX program around 2022. And the big push from like 2021 and onwards was you need to specialize. You need to become a user researcher. You need to be a UI designer. You need to be a product designer. And now I'm seeing a big shift with AI, especially back to being a UX generalist. It comes up, if anyone reads like Nielsen Norman Group or Interaction Design Foundation, they kind of touch on this in further detail. But, you know, there's more value in communicating UX and understanding the whole fundamental level to spot errors with AI or work with it to get what you want rather than being isolated to, I only can do user research. That's great, but I think working at a company that where UX is very new, they still think UX is like graphic design or like website design. Like the full maturity of UX across companies aren't the same. So just having that generous knowledge, I think, is more crucial than ever, especially in how you integrate AI with those processes.
Can I piggyback off of that? Yeah. I'm just going to say, this is interesting because Nolan, who works with me, raise your hand. We were just driving up from the Chicagoland area, and we were talking about this today. Like, he was talking about like when he came out of school, and he was, kind of a jack of all trades, a generalist, and they're like, oh, we're really looking for someone with these specialty skills, right? And it's like, it's sort of flipped now where it's, it's almost better to be a jack of all trade and know all of these things. So I just wanted to jump in on that. Thanks.
Yeah, no, and I'll jump in that as well. Like I make this joke with my students because I'm in a trivia league where like everything is just trivia to me, right? Like how can I, and that's how I sort of consume media is like, oh, this is interesting. Where can I put this into what I'm doing? And in the Department of Advertising, our founder, Charles Sandage, really did speak to this T-shaped model, and we use that a lot. And I know you're talking about that in your session later on today, but it is this idea that you need to know a little bit of everything, right? And it doesn't, and maybe that's freeing because you don't have to be an expert in it, but it will channel your energies towards something that you really want to specialize in. So yes, I completely endorse that. The one thing I would go back to the original question was that one thing I love about the Alpha and Gen Z generation is that something can look like something and not be entirely that. So I think the younger generations get a bad rap of not knowing what's going on in the world or not being educated about, economics or politics or whatever like that. And I think that's completely false. But because I think we're not understanding how that information is being delivered. So for instance, I grew up watching news programs, right? And so, because that was a thing that existed. But now, if I'm on TikTok, I can watch someone do a makeup tutorial and learn about Mideast politics at the same time. It's entertainment and it's news, right? And I think to the general public, oh, all they're doing is watching makeup tutorials. And you're like, no, I'm actually learning about something else. So I think it's this fascinating intersection of entertainment and news. And it's because you're doing something that's relevant, that it's familiar, that's comfortable to you. It's also, and enjoyable. Are you okay? I'm okay. Okay. I don't want to be the person who's just like talking while she's dying. Do you need some water? Okay. No, you're fine. I want to make sure you're okay. Okay. So going back to that point, like I just think it's something I think we can't always judge being like, oh, news looks like this, and entertainment looks like this, and education looks like this. And I think especially in an educational setting, I think we get a bad rap of being like, oh, education must look like this, and it needs to be sat at a desk, and there needs to be a big lecture hall, and learning looks different. And, I like to think that I make my classes fun and entertaining because that's what's fun and entertaining to me. If I'm not having fun, why would you enjoy anything that I'm saying, right? So I love this idea that the new way of learning looks different, but that doesn't mean that it's wrong or bad. It's just adapting to a changing medium and understanding that I can be on my phone and still be paying attention to what's going on. It doesn't mean it's one or the other. Now, I understand there's a lot of behavioral research that says multitasking is bad and you're not actually doing it. I get that. But as a neurodivergent person, that's actually how I intake information, is that I can be doing 3 things at once and still be understanding what's going on around me. And I think with that, coupled with product design, user design, I think is sort of that new way forward.
I think something that really needs to change or break is the idea that UX should like work in a silo. Like I think we need to start thinking about not just designing features like for our users, but how can this feature be like profitable and marketable? Like I think I work with so many students. Good. Are you okay? Okay. I work with so many students that don't understand the ecosystem of where UX sits with engineering and product, and then they get to the real world and they realize, oh, I don't know how to speak to them. I don't know what they're looking at. And so I think a big thing that needs to change, again, going back to the concept of like, I don't think we're going to be product designers. I think we're going to maybe just be product people. And so I want to ask you, how are you building successful products that are actually making money? Because that's a whole different kind of a thinking and style. And sometimes in like UX classrooms, you know, when you're just focused on design, it's really hard to understand those other elements of like business and engineering, because engineering is going to come up to you and say, how are you actually going to develop this? And I can't do this. It's going to take me 2 years to build this. And then you're going to have to figure it out. And then product is going to be like, well, our business priorities are different. So understanding the ecosystem of how product engineering and design work together, and honestly scaling your, and again, to everything that everyone said, like our scopes are getting bigger, and that involves the business side. Like, please learn that, and because that's going to make you successful, and it's going to make you know how to speak to leaders and stakeholders and pitch your ideas and move them across the finish line, because that's what really matters. So.
Awesome. Sorry for my coughing, but I appreciate all your responses, and I appreciate you all coming here to be on our panel today. And for each of you have speaking, you know, you're going to be speakers in your own sessions. So a round of applause for our panel. So after a short break, we'll have our afternoon sessions begin at 1:05. So you got 8 minutes or so. So check your online program for the full schedule. It's listed under the QR code. That link has been changed, correct? Yes. So it's in your badge. One of the QR codes in here. A shout out first for our SCD DTX classes. That's the other QR code, but one of the other codes is to look at your program. So there's something for everyone this afternoon, and of course all day tomorrow. So I hope you'll make the most of this community while we're all here together. So thank you so much, everybody.